I think that always keeping that perspective, and it really helps to always look forward, which I think is the most important thing. That's the word that always comes to me, and I always try to remember that when things are good or bad.
Welcome to Work Inspired, a podcast where leaders in business, commercial real estate, technology, and design come together to discuss change, challenge, and opportunity in today's professional world. This show is powered by BOS, a leader in commercial interiors. The team of workplace experts at BOS is equipped and ready to help you navigate the path to your next workspace. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting out in your career, you're going to learn something new today. So sit back, relax, enjoy, and get ready to work inspired. On today's episode of Work Inspired, we're speaking with Vamsi Bonthala, who's the CEO of Arbor Lodging Partners and Arbor Lodging Management, an organization that both owns and manages hotels throughout the United States. We'll talk about how they're using exceptional work culture and a people-first approach to create memorable visitor experiences and real value for their partners. Work Inspired starts right now. Vamsi, thanks so much for being here on the show with us today. So excited to speak with you and hopefully learn something from you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
So I'd like to start each episode by just kind of understanding the professional story and journey of each of our guests. So tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of leading up to what you're doing today.
Yeah, my journey started pretty traditional and then took a little bit of a turn, which I think often probably happens with entrepreneurs. I went to school. I went straight through to law school, and I ended up in New York working at a law firm. And as you can guess, that sounds pretty traditional at that point. And I was doing really interesting stuff. And as you can imagine, working at a law firm in New York doing private equity work, my hours were crazy. And to be honest, my initial thoughts on doing something entrepreneurial were probably escapism, if anything else. And so my co-founder and current business partner is also one of my closest friends, Shinal Patel. He was working in investment banking, and we were just getting together over lunches and drinks and talking about different ways that we wanted to go do something on our own. Quickly gravitated to real estate. We loved just the bricks and sticks aspect of it, something that was tangible. And within that, we started to think about hotels. And, to the average person, it sounds a little crazy. We did not come from hotel backgrounds, but we at least knew some people within our communities that were in the business. So it didn't sound quite as exotic. And I think more importantly, it aligned on two fronts. There was the front of what our interests and passions are. If I can be on a plane traveling somewhere, I'm doing it. I love all things people's, places, and cultures. And so hotel and travel seemed to align with that. And also for a couple of guys that were young and just starting their business, what we could really add was not capital or access to capital, but we could add sweat. And so hotel being an operational business, we saw an opportunity of where we could find some interesting deals and approach it more like a private equity type of transaction, of where we rolled up our sleeves and really got into the nitty gritty of operations and tried to figure out how to improve them. Whereas if we were doing industrial or retail, you're really just buying some leases and there's not quite as much to do on that front. We, of course, used third-party management when we started. Like I mentioned, we knew nothing about the business, but learned everything we could on the way. About 3 years in, we terminated third-party management, brought it in-house, and have kind of grown the business since then.
That's awesome. So Arbor Lodging, you own hotels? You manage hotels? Do you contract out to other owners? How's it set up? Or is it a mix of numerous different things?
It's both. So we are what's called vertically integrated. So we both take the lead on acquiring and owning the asset as well as operating the asset. And so we have Arbor Lodging Partners, which is really our investment arm that owns the hotels. And then we have Arbor Lodging Management, which manages the assets. And so we have a pretty extensive team in the corporate office. Vast majority of those folks are on the operational side, just given that that's a much more people-intensive side of the business. And that covers everything from operations to food and beverage, human resources, accounting, sales, all the things that go into all the components of a well-run hotel.
Awesome. So you went from, I think, Kirkland Ellis, that's where you were as a
That's right.
lawyer, right? And you were working a lot of hours and you said, you know what? If I'm going to work a lot of hours, I'm going to do it for myself and start a company. And it's been what, a decade and a half, 16 years, I think I saw that
Yeah,
you've been with
that's
Arbor
right.
Lodging. How's the
That
growth story been?
snuck
How
up
are you?
on us, by the way. I didn't
Yeah.
realize it had been that long.
How has it been going?
It's been going great. It's been a fun experience. And when I say great, it doesn't mean that every single moment has been perfect and everything has been easy. I would say it's been quite the opposite, but it has fulfilled the goals of building something from scratch, and it's our baby. And so
Mhm.
really what we've experienced in this relatively short period of time is two monster impacts on the hotel business. First, we had the global financial crisis, then obviously COVID. And then in between, we've had opportunities to grow the business as well. And so it's been a really great journey growing the business, growing with a really awesome team of people, and navigating through all of those challenges while all the way always looking forward and continuing to grow along the way.
Excellent. Yeah, I love talking to people in your space because just like you said, it's all about relationships. It's a very people first business, and yes, you deal with space like we do in our business, and we work in your space as well. But a lot of the work that we do is in the corporate side. But I think that there's a whole lot that corporations can learn from the hospitality industry about this guest experience, about employee experience, and so I want to focus in a little bit on relationships. You had said kind of one of the things that attracted you to the industry was that if you can be out and if you can be with people and be kind of networking and developing relationships, that's where you want to be. Tell me about some of the ways that you kind of cultivate and manage relationships because I can imagine in your business that's probably one of the most important things, right?
Absolutely. I think like many things, the simplest answer is always the best answer. Relationships in business are no different than any other relationship in your life, be it with your spouse or your friends or your family. And it needs to be built on trust and communication. And it takes a while to get there. You usually don't propose to somebody on the first date. And business is quite the same. You might have a good feeling about a partner. You might say, hey, we could really do some great business together. But it's rare that the first deal comes together or that after the first time that you've met, everything has been figured out because there's so many details along the way that you have to know to figure out, hey, can we work together? But between good and bad, it's always the same skills that matter. It's direct communication, trying to figure out what somebody else's needs are and addressing them before they even ask, and just being a resource at all times. I think even though I ended up going the entrepreneurial route, there was a lot that I learned in just a few years of being an attorney, and especially because it was in a service business and you had clients and you were always focused on making sure that these clients that were paying you a lot of money felt like their needs were being served. And business relationships are no different. And one of the first things that was always told to me when I was being trained is your number one job is to make everybody else's life easier. And we talk about that here as well, that in our business relationships, even if we might be equals or partners or co-investors, we can't forget that the way that we are good partners is by making other people's lives easier.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the pandemic, and when you think about relationships, a lot of the first firms that were back in person, or some that never actually left if they weren't mandated to, were the law firms. And I don't know if that's because they're kind of control or compete type cultures more so than the create or collaborate ones, which also benefit from being in person. But I think it's like you said that it's about relationships. It's about being together in person. So I'm interested to know from you, because it's such an important aspect of your business. When we went through the pandemic and a lot of us were forced to be in a remote capacity through the digital space, did relationship building or cultivating good relationships, did it change at all for you? Was it harder? How did you handle that?
it was certainly more difficult to be making new relationships. I think cultivating them was extremely important, and we just had to do it in a different way. I'll be the first to admit that all that hard work that we put in to build the business prior to the pandemic hitting was something we were able to take advantage of when nobody was seeing each other for a year to a year and a half. And we had the benefit of existing relationships that we were able to capitalize on to work through our existing portfolio as well as look at new opportunities. And if I were to be starting from scratch and I didn't have the opportunity to meet people in person, I think it would have been a challenge. A lot of what we built over this last decade and a half has happened in person, and it takes time. And it's not always just over dinners and things like that, but a lot of it is showing up in people's offices and letting them have the time with you that they need. Because often when it's on a call, if they know it or not, they're rushing, you're rushing, everybody's trying to move on to the next appointment. But when you're in person, everybody affords each other that respect and that extra time. And that's really where things advance, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. As you look at kind of how you did business before the pandemic and where you're headed, do you see a return to pre-pandemic type of in-person experiences, or has the pandemic changed the way that your industry operates from a business perspective? We can get to the guest experience in a minute, but has the last 2 years had an indelible impact on hospitality space?
Well, you're asking a forever optimist, so I will say we'll get back to it, but I'll give some more details on that. I think that there's a few different ways to think about that. First and foremost, I do think that we're social beings and that we want to be together. And what came out of the pandemic, first and foremost, was the leisure aspect of it. People wanted to be with their families, they wanted to see their friends, they wanted to go to weddings again, all of those things. And we are now starting to see that pick up on the corporate side. And we always knew that would happen. And certainly when you are in a business generation mode, it gets a lot easier for that dam to break, because if your number one client has your competitor in their conference room pitching them, you're going to get on a plane the next day and go meet them in person as well. You can only so long avoid those in-person meetings if you're on that side of the business. Where I do think that we have to be more thoughtful about travel is going to be a lot of the intra-company travel that was happening on these big businesses. You know, small businesses might not really have that, but if you're Apple, there were probably a lot of people flying between Austin and the Bay Area for a one-day meeting. And along the way, they may have figured out, hey, we don't need to be flying people around for this. We could do that via Zoom. And so there is going to be an impact from that. But I think there's always some reversion to the mean. Along the way, people will recognize the value of why we were doing what we were doing in the first place, which was meeting in person. And there just may be different ways that people meet in person. So that intra-company meeting may no longer happen. But if a lot of people are working from home, you're now going to have a greater emphasis for your teams to actually get together. And that's one of the types of businesses that we're trying to target now. Because if everybody is remote all the time, what we're seeing is team leaders making a concerted effort to get everybody together once a month or once a quarter. And they're hosting those at hotels, and they're doing mini retreats. And that's an opportunity for us in our business. So sure. I think the chairs will shuffle around a little bit, but at the end of the day, we don't think business travel is gone. It is going to come back, and it's just kind of a matter of what it looks like and how quickly it comes back.
Yeah, I agree. I like the sound of that. Now you have, according to your website, you've over 1,000 employees. Is that correct?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So 1,000 employees. Anytime I've got a guest on the show where there's a large team, especially given the challenges we faced over the last 24 months, and in the current climate where, retaining people is, I think, as hard as it's ever been, and finding new people is difficult. What's some advice you've got to other leaders or people leaders about effectively managing a team through a challenging time?
Yeah, look, and I think the other thing to add on all of that list of challenges you mentioned, in our case at least, is that they're all remote effectively. We have 38 locations across the country. And so it's not like we're all together in the exact same place
Yep.
every day. And so, look, it's cliche, and I almost cringe when I say it, but culture matters so much. And so, one of the things that we've had to build over time, and it doesn't happen overnight, is that sense of culture and teamwork and making decisions pursuant to your guiding principles and staying disciplined about it. And we always had like a little bit of a competing headwind as well, because if you are a hotel employee working at one of our franchise hotels, you get all these training modules you're going through that say, this is the Marriott way, or this is the Hilton way. And then we're also saying, this is the Arbor Lodging way. And you got to get everybody to buy into all of it, because the Hilton and Marriott stuff is extremely important. And our guests care about that. But it's very important to us that we have an Arbor Lodging way of doing things, and that everybody feels like they're part of that. And so that has always been kind of the core of how we do everything, and just making sure that culture is felt the same way, no matter what state you're in, what location you're in. But we have the same challenges everybody else does, as far as, especially when you're navigating through hard times. And I think your particular question was, how do you manage that team through a time like COVID? And I think one of the things that we had to, there's all sorts of things that I can talk about just on the business decision-making, about being decisive and clear. But the two things that I think that really worked for us well were we communicated a ton. We started to implement new things that we did not do on a normal basis, as far as like community talks and nationwide Zooms and company-wide Zooms, so that everybody could hear from us, and that we were letting them know what we were experiencing and letting everybody know what was going on. And I think part of that was that we did not want to ever forget that, it was hard and stressful and scary for us as leaders, but it obviously was hard and stressful and scary for everybody else too. And I think that when you're in the thick of it and you're in the fire and you're making those tough decisions, it's easy to just be like, well, I'm the only one going through this. And we have to step back and remember everybody is going through this together. And when you do that, you make that extra effort to make sure to communicate just that much better.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing to me. We do a lot of these episodes, and we talk to guests in all different industries, and especially at larger organizations, it might be the chief human resources officer or the CMO or the head of operations or IT. It's like we've talked to people in all different areas of different industries, and it's amazing to me the consistency in some of these answers. You say the culture cliche, but so often people go back to saying that at its foundation, culture is kind of where it all starts. And without that, none of the other stuff really matters, because you're not going to keep a team together with a poor culture. A strong culture is kind of the key ingredient. And then, like you just said, clear, consistent communication, especially through crisis, is so important. So it's fascinating, like it doesn't really matter the industry. It's the same advice that I hear from successful leaders over and over again. And I think, you're saying the same things as the real successful leaders at Fortune 100 companies. I think it's really great advice. I'm interested to know about that guest experience, though. So I was trying to think, when I was setting up the question set for your interview, about the term commodity. Would you describe a hotel as a commodity? Is it something that's like, a price-driven decision? Because when I think about where I'm going to stay, it's usually has something to do with where is it located? The logistics, the proximity to where I want to be. But the reviews, my previous experiences, a lot of times it comes back to the experience that either I had or someone that I know and trust has had at that location. So I'm kind of interested to know, you have a number of different hotels, and with the management side, different brands, like you had just said. How do you differentiate Arbor Lodging or Arbor Management?
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of things that go into the answer, and we've talked about a couple of those so far today as well, is that there is certainly some commodity aspect to it, just like anything. A shirt is a shirt is a shirt. but there's a reason you buy a different brand or different fabrics or different sizes, and they make you feel different when you're doing it. And you don't wear the same shirt for every occasion. And so in our case, it's the same thing, that at the end of the day, we have to connect with our guests and make them feel a certain way. And that's where you move from being a commodity to being a more unique and individualistic type of offering. And that can still be a Hilton Garden Inn in 8 different locations, but all of our Hilton Garden Inns do not operate the exact same. And there's a reason for that. Sometimes it's the leadership and it's the team, sometimes it's the location, but at the end of the day, it's because guests feel differently when they go there. And it matters also on who that guest is. If you're just in town for a one-time trip and you never expect to come back ever again, and your reason may be very specific, you might just be looking for the most convenient place or the best deal. But we have a lot of our guests that are repeat guests. They're coming to see their parents every couple of months. We have, obviously on the corporate side, we have some folks that come every week or stay with us for 6 months at a time. And when I hear about those folks repeating and staying with us, that means a lot, because they have the ability to make a decision. They have the ability to go to multiple places, and they've chosen to keep coming back to the same place. And I just don't believe you can be a commodity when somebody's making that decision about your asset.
Yeah. I on your website, you say you connect guests with exceptional experiences, and then you mentioned data. And I wonder, how important is that to know who you're delivering the experience to know something about your guest, whether, like you just said, they're a one-time visitor or a repeat customer. How do you kind of leverage that knowledge to translate to an exceptional experience?
It's a good question. And I think that at various types of segments within our industry, there's different ways that can get handled. We don't operate in the luxury space, but I think to answer your question, I can give a great example on the luxury side of where when you go to the uber high end of the hotel space, they actually collect a lot of data about you as a guest. And so when you come, or certainly when you come the second time, they know a lot about what your interests are, what kind of food you ordered, what you liked, what you didn't like, your family members, what their interests are. And they give you that super high curated experience based on that data that they've collected about you. And frankly, that you've been pretty open with sharing with them, because you know that it's all part of the experience that they're going to give to you. We operate mostly in the middle market, and we don't really have access or collect that type of data. But what we've told our team, and they do on their own anyway, is we do that in a non-formal way all the time. We might not have this big database about what a certain client likes to do or not do, but I can promise you go to our front desk agents, they know that, because if that guy has come back multiple times, I've been there in the lobby when somebody comes in to check in and they start asking about their family and their dog and how their trip was and the other places they've gone along the way. I have more times than I can remember seen a front agent desk come from behind the desk and give a guest a hug because they haven't seen each other in a long time. And that might not be as formal as something that the Mandarin Oriental is doing, but we are still being thoughtful about our guests. We're learning about them. It's still data, and we're trying to make a exceptional and unique experience for them when they come and stay with us.
So do you find that it's the people that are at your hotels that are creating these exceptional experiences, or are there other aspects that kind of all coalesce into that experience? It seems like the right people would be the biggest driver. But I also think there's, especially in your space where it's not the highest end luxury, where it's demanded that you get that experience. But maybe there's some opportunities. We had a guest on recently who said some of the most memorable experiences are the ones that are unexpected. When you walk in and you don't expect to have that type of an experience and you get it, you tend to remember and share that a lot more frequently. So I'm interested from your perspective, given the number of employees and the number of hotels that you've got, and all this experience you've got in the space, are there any kind of ingredients for a memorable or exceptional experience that maybe some of our listeners can translate back to their businesses?
Sure. Well, to answer your question, absolutely, it is led by our team. There's multiple components that go into that experience and the value that a guest believes that they're receiving at your hotel, but it begins and ends with the individuals. And I think you could probably think about trips you've had. I certainly can. And I always remember when I felt like I was taken care of above and beyond. The other ways that we try to be thoughtful about that is certainly the design of our hotels as well. We generally go after assets that once we acquire them, we reposition them. And a big component of that is capital expenditure. And what we have seen in our space, and it's not just us, but the whole industry is moving in this direction, is that we did have an approach in our business that was commoditized, to be honest. I would say more like 20 years ago, there was a view that every Hampton Inn should look the exact same. And frankly, the brand didn't even give you an opportunity to really be very creative on the design side. And I think part of that was you try to have everything be uniform when you have a vacuum, when information is not available to you. And once the internet came by and guest reviews became available to everybody, it opened up the opportunity for people to be a little differentiated, because you could then go and look at each asset and make a decision versus just saying, well, I know that brand, I know exactly what I'm going to get, and I'm comfortable with that. And so that has really opened up, I think, a whole new era of design and just interesting assets, even within brands that people did not think that way about. And so with our brands that are Hilton Garden Inns, Residence Inn, Courtyards, there are hallmarks of those brands that a lot of people will expect. And we certainly try to leverage off of that, because that continuity and that uniformity and experience does help get guests in the door. But where we can wow them and get them coming back is when we've been a little bit more thoughtful about certain things. And certainly on the guest experience and how we take care of guests is going to lead that. But we tend not to just be off the shelf about our design as well. We do try to be somewhat unique and curate when we can. For example, we did it was a standard hotel brand in California recently, and the renovation we did custom because we thought the location would do really cool with like a mid-century California chic look to it. And we've heard from guests that they're like, oh, this doesn't look like the other ones that I've been to before. And that's a way to wow them. And that's a way to have them feel like they're getting a little bit more bang for their buck.
Cool. Great advice. Tell me something you're looking forward to in the year ahead, whether it's professionally or personally, now that we're headed out of the pandemic, or at least living with it. What's something that is on your radar for the next 12 months?
Well, I think you segued into my answer, which is I'm looking forward to not talking about the pandemic all the time. So, and that's both personal and professional. But look, we've spent 2 years really being on the defensive, and we had to be. I think other than maybe airlines and cruise, there has not been an industry that's been more impacted by what happened over the last 2 years. And look, I'll take that opportunity to also say I'm just so incredibly proud of our team and how they navigated all of that. You really see a lot in people when your back is against the wall. And what I saw was just a lot of amazing stuff about how people navigated, how people took care of our team members, how we managed relationships. So look, like I said, I'm an optimist. So that was the silver lining part of what were not great days, of just seeing the best come out of all of our people. But now we get to think about some of the other fun parts of the business. We've acquired 4 hotels in the last, like about half a year, just closed on a couple just in the last couple of weeks. And we have some more in the pipeline. So we're back into that growth phase of the business, which is really exciting. And I think that it's also interesting and fun to think about what the new world is going to look like in travel, and how we can try to be smart investors about that. As there's going to be a little bit of going back to the way things were, but some of it's going to be a little bit different. And we want to try to be thoughtful about that. So I'm just excited to be a little bit more forward looking. There are certainly still some headwinds and different types of headwinds that are starting to rear their head. But overall, not talking about the pandemic all the time will be nice.
Yeah, I agree. Very much so. I've got two final questions for you. They're a little bit more personal. You're a young guy who's had a lot of success. What's a resource that's been valuable to you in your professional journey that you can share with others?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've read some of the business books and things like that, and I know certain people can benefit from them. A lot of our team members really like reading different ways that people have approached management and things like that. And I've always learned something or two from those. But the way I like to learn is I actually like to hear about people's experiences. And so like I've always really just enjoyed reading biographies of people I really think have just done amazing things. And so, biographies about Warren Buffett and Steve Jobs and some of these like great business minds of our time who have built businesses or been super smart investors, I've always learned a lot from, because it's some of the subtleties that come out when you do that. Of just, it's one thing to be told, do X, Y, and Z and everything's going to be perfect. And when you read the biographies, you get to also read about all the times they screwed up, which I think is extremely insightful. And then you get to learn about some of the things that really benefited them. And I think it's discipline at the end of the day. There's certain things that successful folks, when things are good or bad, they are just so focused on a certain way that they want to do things. And, take like a Warren Buffett, for example. He's missed things before on the investment side, but he has been wildly successful because he figured out what he thinks works, and he's been super disciplined about it. And he doesn't mind making big bets when he does do that. And I've always appreciated that about entrepreneurs and just really smart business builders, is that while the advice of our personal, financial advisors might be to have diversification and have a little bit of a million things, I think the people that can really be outsized performers in their businesses made big, heavy bets on a singular thing. And it's always fun to read about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's funny when you say the learning from the failures. The thing that surprised me the most of the Steve Jobs documentary was all the crying that happened at Apple. Like all the fighting and
right.
all the conflict. It was a very interesting story. Final question. If you were to retire tomorrow, which I know you're not planning to do anytime soon, but let's say you were, what's some words of wisdom that you'd leave to someone you were mentoring?
The first word that always comes to me is perspective. I think that no matter what's going on, always remember the lows aren't as low as they seem at that moment, but the highs aren't quite as high as you think you might convince yourself they are either. And that really there's very little in life that you can't undo or redo or make another choice about. And so I think that always keeping that perspective, and it really helps to always look forward, which I think is the most important thing. And that's the word that always comes to me. And I always try to remember that when things are good or bad.
Well, I love your optimism. I love your outlook and your perspective. Thank you so much for the inspiration and for the words of wisdom and for being on our show. I know your time's valuable. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you.
Same here. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace Digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.